Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining this Scots Defend Assange event on World Press Freedom Day. For those of you who've not heard of Julian Assange, Julian is the founder of Wikileaks. Wikileaks is the wonderful service that was put together, which allowed whistleblowers and those who wanted to release public information that the public needed, information in the public interest, to a vast number of people without compromising themselves. Wikileaks provided the tools and the technology to be able to do that on a vast scale. For example, in Iraq and Afghanistan, we knew about many of the crimes that were happening on the ground, and people who were journalists on the ground knew about it, but there wasn't enough evidential proof for it to be widely consumed. And for reporters, for everybody else to say it with a certain degree of conviction. And with the publication of the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, Julian Assange helped to change the narrative on the crimes that our governments commit in our name. In addition to the work he did in relation to revealing war crimes, WikiLeaks has also done work in revealing issues of climate justice, in revealing issues of corruption in Africa, across the world, in Britain and America, and of course, providing information about the manipulation of political processes, for example, in America. And as a result of this, what WikiLeaks has done is helped us to see what our governments are really doing and help to hold those governments accountable. And we are here because Julian Assange, for the last 10 years, has been undergoing psychological torture and arbitrary detention. He is currently held in Belmarsh prison awaiting extradition to the United States on trumped up charges in order to silence him and to silence us, in order to prevent us from knowing what our governments are doing. And it is this that we are gathering here to protest, and it is this that we are gathering here to condemn. And I'm delighted to welcome to the panel Chris Williamson, former MP, John White, the writer, and Greg Hadfield, former journalist. And what we'd like to do in today's event, which is part of World Press Freedom Day, is join in the march around the world defending Julian Assange. This event is particularly hosted by Scots Defend Assange. Some of you will remember the event that Scots Defend Assange put up earlier this year up in Scotland. And now, thanks to COVID, we're all doing all these events online, but we are bringing in the different and diverse voices from around the globe. My name is Deepa Govindarajan. I'll be your host today, and I'm facilitating this debate. The structure of this event is that we will have 3 sets of contributions from the 3 speakers. If you have any questions or comments, please could you raise them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. For those who are on the live link, you are welcome to raise questions and comments in the discussion there, but if you can, we've asked our live stream experts to pass on some of your questions so we can answer them through the Q&A. We'll try our best to answer all questions, but obviously there is a limit of time. We expect to finish just after 5 o'clock. So that's in about an hour's time. And without further ado, could I hand you over to the first speaker, John White.
Well, thanks, Deepa. Thanks very much. And thank you to my fellow panelists for taking part in this very important event on this World Press Freedom Day. A series of international web chats on the plight of Julian Assange, which I think is hugely important because it affirms the role of internationalism in causes of injustice. Julian Assange's plight cuts across all cultural differences, all national differences, all religious differences. His is about what it means to be human in our time, because we live in a time when dehumanization is so pervasive, and the dehumanization of peoples living in countries that our governments have slated for attack, for conquest, is really something that we must address and confront. Julian Assange did that with the publication of the devastating Iraqi war logs. And I would say that Julian Assange, in doing so, was more than a journalist at that juncture. He was more than a publisher. He was actually a dissident, and he was a rebel. rebelling against a status quo that is dripping in the blood of the innocents at home and abroad. Because we know that a foreign policy of imperialism, of war, rests on foundations of social and economic injustice at home. What is the role of the press in our time? We don't have a free press in the West, in our society. The very term in relation to the West is an oxymoron. We have the simulacrum of a free press. How could we have a free press when it's owned by a clutch of right-wing billionaires and corporate interests with self-evident political objectives and aims? And it's all about inculcating false consciousness within the masses, enough to allow that which should have been consigned to the dustbin of history long ago to maintain it and to sustain it. How else to explain a succession of Tory governments in Britain, anti-working class governments? Because they persuade enough working class people to vote for them based on base instincts of patriotism, of a history of empire and colonialism and imperialism that is yet to be properly addressed. It's glorified, and it's something that we have to confront on the left, because it's a real problem for us, and it's halting our progress towards transforming this rancid society into something approximating to humane and civilized. Karl Marx once said that to call upon them, i.e. the people, to give up their illusions about their condition is to call upon them to give up a condition that requires illusions. And we live in a world of illusion, the illusion that this is the best of all possible world, the illusion that we're the good guys in this unending movie of war and conflict, and that when we kill civilians, it is a mistake incompatible with our cultural values. But when Russia or China or Iran kill civilians, it is entirely in keeping with their cultural values. Julian Assange pulled back the curtain of democracy to reveal the savage beast of hegemony which resides behind that curtain, and that is why he has incurred the wrath of the masters of the world. And this sham of an extradition hearing is an absolute travesty of justice. This is merely a transmission belt to speed him on his way to the bowels of the US justice system. What I would say is this: we need to make sure that our political class and those responsible in this process pay as heavy and as high a political price as possible for daring to persecute this man. They've already assassinated his character, and now it's about the slow motion assassination of his person. James Connolly, the great Irish leader, speaking at the beginning of the last century, once said that all war is an atrocity, and those who attempt to single out any particular phase of it as more atrocious than the other is engaged in an attempt to confuse the public mind. And he also, speaking of mainstream journalists in his time, described them as the ink slingers of the jingo press. And as it was in his time, so it is in our time. This mainstream media that we have is made up not of journalists who are committed to unearthing the truth and holding the powerful to account on behalf of the people, but they are committed to maintaining the status quo of injustice at home and abroad, and to holding the people to account on behalf of the powerful. Julian Assange shamed them. He showed them up for the careerists and opportunists that they are, and they turned on him when these concocted, and I maintain they were concocted, sex charges were brought against him. It had the desired Pavlovian effect of demobilizing Julian Assange's support at that point in time. Julian Assange has been right every step of the way, as have his supporters. They knew that these sex charges and this attempt to get him to Sweden was part of the process whereby he would be extradited. And we know that the current leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, when he was the head of the Director of Public Prosecutions, he was the one that forced or persuaded his Swedish counterpart to continue to maintain the pressure with that infamous email that he sent, "Don't get cold feet now." That is a man who's the leader of the Labour Party. Foreign policy is a litmus test for us living in imperialist centres such as the UK and the US. And it is why Julian Assange has been so persecuted, and it's why Jeremy Corbyn was so demonised when he was leader of the Labour Party. They could live with his domestic programme, albeit with some complaints and some pressure to change a few things, but it's foreign policy that made him the real danger to the status quo, because it's foreign policy that forges this country's national identity on the world stage, allowing it to pose as a great power under the umbrella of US hegemony. Just think about what Jeremy Corbyn's premiership would have threatened. It would have threatened the arms trade to Saudi Arabia, Britain's alliance with Israel and its unending support for Israel's occupation and system of apartheid. It would have been a threat to the Atlantic Alliance and a threat to Britain's membership of NATO. Anytime anyone comes close to threatening the status quo, then they must be destroyed at all costs. That's why Julian Assange is in the position he's in. He is not a villain. He's not a criminal. The criminals are those who are engaged in this process of extradition. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much. Just a couple of things. For those of you who are interested in a discussion of the human rights violations in Julian's case and also the legal aspects of the case in a very, very cold and probably a more legalistic way, there was a discussion yesterday which we hosted with Robert Thibault, who helped Edward Snowden get out of Hong Kong, Ben Weisner at the ACLU, and Mats Andenas, Professor of Law at Norway and Honorary QC here in the UK. And that discussion is now available via YouTube, and for anybody who's interested, you can view that. We also had a discussion this morning with a Swiss investigative journalist, Serena Tenari, who helped put together Journalists Speak Up for Assange, and also Professor Ian Munro, expert on whistleblowing, Professor Des Friedman and Justin Schlossberg, both at who were previously chairs of the Media Reform Coalition, talking about power and dissent. So that's also soon to be available on YouTube as part of this World Press Freedom Day discussion. Thanks, John, for that contribution. Very powerful as usual. And I just wanted to make one minor factual correction. It was Paul Close at the CPS, obviously working for Keir Starmer, who wrote that letter, but okay, we don't actually have the confirmation. I mean, obviously you would expect that everything that goes through the CPS would have some oversight from Starmer, especially when it was the most important case of his tenure, but just a minor correction just for the record. So
we can say, I think, that if Keir Starmer in the role of Director of Public Prosecutions, he set the culture by which such a letter could have been written.
Absolutely. I think there are questions to be asked there, definitely, and that I definitely agree with you on that. Over now to you, Greg. Greg Hadfield is a former journalist, very active in the Labour Party in Brighton and Hove, and also nationally interested in many of the issues that we're thinking about in terms of the Labour leaks, etc. So, Greg, would you be happy to talk about why the case of Julian Assange is important in relation to press freedom, given your own long experience in the industry?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and it's a privilege to share a platform, a Zoom platform, with John and Chris, an old friend Chris. We go back some way. It's caused me to reflect a lot on my career. But first, I just wanted to say on World Press Freedom Day, it's worth remembering that journalists, there's lots of excellent journalists who literally put their lives on the line in some countries. And in many others, if they're not risking their lives, they're risking their freedoms. And we must always applaud those individual journalists across the ages. And it made me think back, actually, because side by side with those journalists, whatever a journalist is, there are sources. There are unseen, unknown sources who are making similar decisions. And just looking back on my own, how I got into journalism, I remember in 1984, Clive Ponting, a civil servant, who revealed documents about the sinking of the Belgrano in the Falklands War. So with that, in that context, I'm also slightly concerned sometimes when we lump in MSM, mainstream media, all in one big block. There are good reasons for that. There are structural reasons that we can come back to. But if we do it in an onions way, there's a risk of feeding into the idea of fake news, so that when the truth does get out, there's this atmosphere that even those telling the truth can be questioned. Oh, it's just another fake news. So I think we've got to be careful about that. And I totally understand why that is. I mean, as someone who worked in Fleet Street for 15 years, for every newspaper just about, except for the one I joined journalism in for, and that was The Guardian, and in retrospect, that's probably a good job. But I can honestly say I've met some excellent people who haven't just been in it as for the freebies, for the glamour, for the expenses, for the foreign travel. They are principled, and they're working within, as John pointed out, a capitalist media owned by billionaires globally. It made me reflect as well that I happened to be in the New York Times building on the day that the Collateral Murder video was published. It came out in 2010. And that was a long time actually after I'd left Fleet Street. I was one of the first Fleet Street journalists. Well, I was the first Fleet Street journalist to leave the internet in the mid-90s. I mean, just a bit of background. So I began in the days of typewriters and carbon paper and landlines. Yeah. And so in those days, we had Daniel Ellsberg in 1973 with documents, big documents. I was inspired by All the President's Men and Deep Throat and all the sources and the documents that had to be dug out, and journalists and their sources worked side by side. And then I joined the first new technology newspaper in 1986, by which time there were keyboards and photocopiers and fax machines and all that sort of stuff. And in 1995, 96, shortly after Cash for Questions, I left for the internet. And I didn't return until 2009-10, and that was when I was at the Telegraph, MP's expenses, which was based on information on a CD-ROM. Do you remember CD-ROMs? We've had lots of debate about what constitutes a journalist. We have debates about citizen journalists. We have the difference, particularly in Julian's case, about the difference between a publisher or a journalist or an editor. And those are very interesting intellectual debates. But one thing that has been common throughout is that real journalists protect their sources, because that is the lifeblood for truth and all our freedoms. Absolutely. And I've been asking myself that supposing in a pre-digital world, Julian Assange had existed, would any decent old media company have thrown him under the bus? And if he'd been a pre-digital journalist, freelancer or staffer arrested in an authoritarian country, or a not so authoritarian, or a liberal country, would they really have just turned a blind eye to attempts to put him in isolation, to put him in bondage, to extradite him to an America where the death penalty is used and where you can routinely get 145 years if the very compromised judicial system, compromised by political interference, and where extradition arrangements are so unequal. So a lot has changed in that period. And now we've gone through a period when pre-Google and pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, old media, big media, felt really threatened. Their model had been challenged. Until then, they saw their job in discovering data information, hugging it to themselves, however they got it, whoever they got it from, hugging it to themselves until they released it when they chose to do it and how they choose to do it. They didn't care about the readers, they didn't care who they were. But all that's changed now after Facebook and Twitter, is that actually now we've seen a new media emerging. And for some of that, it's good, and some of it is bad. I'm going to start off with the bad because I want to end on some optimism about it. It used to be that first get your £10 million and buy a printing press, and then you can try and mix it with the corporate media and the big media. And of course, no one could do that. So now we've got that plurality. The trouble is, it's been replaced by Google, Facebook, and Twitter, all of whom actually now are setting themselves up as global police forces almost. They're becoming controlling, more controlling even, than national newspapers or national media organizations. Because not only do they know anything and everything about anyone using their platforms, but they are now exerting unaccountably restrictions on what can be said by whom. So we've now got, in a world of surveillance capitalism, we have cross-border megaliths that increasingly use their editorial power to limit findability, to monitor content, that's Facebook, to silence individual voices by suspending, expelling them from Twitter. So that's the bad side. But the good side is that it never was about what we used to call the World Wide Web, the web. It's always about the internet. Because actually, the internet and the internet technologies means that we can be more ambitious than getting halfway decent articles in a few newspapers, national or local, or to have lead letters in local newspapers, all of which is important. We must still always have that communication strategy, do our best to identify the best journalists wherever they're working. We've also got to build that alternative media network, which will be a pluralistic one of different voices, respected brands, and we've seen a lot of those emerging already. But what we really can do and must do, especially in the case of Julian Assange, is what we are doing. And that's connecting with each other. We're building local, national, and global movements without relying on the big media, with the BBC, The Guardian. We're building with like-minded citizens who believe not only in speaking truth to power, but actually in taking power for ourselves. And that's what the technologies allow us to do. And that's what I believe in this post-digital, post-Google world. It's not just about Julian Assange. He knows it's not just about him. It wasn't just about Clyde Ponting or Daniel Ellsberg or Deep Throat or all the other multiple sources that feed into this knowledge of speaking truth to power. It's the principle of how we take action and take power to make sure that the crimes that Julian exposed are never done again, not in our name and not in the name of the United States or any other country or any other corporate capitalist adventure. And that's why we've got to get Julian Assange out of prison. We mustn't extradite him, and he should be a hero, not a prisoner.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much. For those of you who are interested in the current status of Julian's condition but have not kept up with the news in the last few days, Julian's currently, Belmarsh prison, where Julian is currently held, is in lockdown. Julian is in isolation 23 to 23 and a half hours a day. This, as you know, is a continuation of 10 years of psychological torture, including time when he was arbitrarily confined within the Ecuadorian embassy with barely 12 to 15 meters of space to walk in, and with no access to direct sunlight, with no access in the final few years to even friends and family. And right now, his trial continues, despite the fact that for over a month, his lawyers have not been able to meet with him. And as you can imagine, it's 40,000 pages worth of documentation, which he has to review in relation to contesting the American attempts to extradite him. He's in a very difficult position, and we urge you to use the Don't Extradite Assange website template to write to your MP, to encourage your MP to take a stance, to give Assange bail, and to stop this persecution of a journalist and publisher. And we urge you to do this on World Press Freedom Day as your one act of resistance to this system. So thank you, Greg, for your contribution. That was really helpful to frame things. And I'd like to request Chris Williamson, former MP and a great grassroots campaigner, to tell us a little bit about his thoughts on the issue.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Deepa, and it's a great privilege to have been asked to speak alongside the other two esteemed speakers, and indeed yourself, on this really important day. And look, freedom of speech is under attack right now, isn't it? And it's so important, I think, that we have voices speaking out for freedom of speech. And, you know, journalism should be the medium, in my opinion, through which freedom of speech is manifest. But sadly, that's not happening as it should be, in my opinion. Journalism is a very honourable profession. And I remember growing up, you know, being inspired by people like John Pilgill, and in later life, it's been an incredible privilege to actually meet and converse with John Pilger, and he's still doing some incredibly important work. Sadly, he doesn't seem to appear so much on the mainstream broadcast media platforms in the way in which he used to do. However, he is using the alternative digital media world to get his message out on YouTube and so on. And he's produced some really important documentaries. But what troubles me, and I've been a victim of it to some extent, and certainly many other people have been, and certainly Julian is one the most high profile and celebrated individual who has been a victim of the closing down of dissenting voices. And we've seen this only this week, where Diane Abbott, for example, and another Labour MP appeared on a webinar broadcast similar to what we're on today. And a couple of Jewish former members of the Labour Party who had been unfairly expelled, grotesquely, in my opinion, treated and expelled from the Labour Party, participated in the webinar discussion. They asked some questions, and there has been a significant move now made to force the new leader of the Labour Party to discipline Diane and Bell for having the temerity to appear on this webinar alongside these other ex-members of the party who happened to get on there to ask a question. This is where we've got to. This is outrageous. I mean, that's just one minor example, but it illustrates the sort of level of pressure which is being applied now to close down freedom of speech. And in any democracy, and we live in a so-called liberal democracy, don't we? And yet it seems certain voices aren't allowed to be heard, and it's predominantly progressive voices that aren't allowed to be heard. And I think a real concern for me, and I think for all of us who believe in free speech, who believe in democracy, is the lack of plurality in the mainstream media. I take the point that Greg has made, because even with that, sometimes you do get some good reportage in the mainstream. I mean, there was a very good panorama expose of the government's handling of the COVID-19 crisis as one example of that. But much of their output, much of the panorama output for that matter, and I'm a big fan and supporter of the BBC, is basically low-rent journalism. And you don't expect that, it seems to me, from the state broadcaster. We shouldn't expect it. We should expect much, much higher standards. And I think one of the major concerns in relation to that lack of plurality is the fact that, certainly as far as the print media is concerned, is that it's owned by a handful of tax-exiled billionaires. And they end up ensuring that the mouthpieces that they own, the newspapers that they own, become mouthpieces for the neoliberal consensus and neoliberal status quo, which has been an absolute disaster. It was inflicted on the country 40 years ago, as you know, with the election of Margaret Thatcher. But in terms of inequality, in terms of poverty, in terms of our public services, in terms of secure employment, it's been a catastrophe for millions of people. In the fifth biggest economy in the world, we have 14 million people living in poverty. But you wouldn't know that if you looked through the newspapers or indeed watch much of the broadcast media. And some of the broadcast media, Channel 4 is another station which I'm a big supporter of, but they've indulged in this kind of poverty porn. I think it was Channel 4, it might have been Channel 5, but I think they did Benefit Street, was it? And the kind of implication was, people on Social Security were scroungers, ne'er-do-wells, and this isn't the role of the media, particularly to pick on, the poorest, most vulnerable people in society. And what is also troubling is, in my experience of 7.5 years in Parliament, is that, parliamentarians and the government, the executive, is increasingly driven by public relations and spin. A couple of examples, really. The Skripal affair. It's all got a bit quiet about the Skripals, hasn't it? They seem to have disappeared from public view now, even though they've managed to recover from a deadly poison, allegedly, that was allegedly placed there by Russian agents. But there was very, very patchy evidence to support that. But, to look at the mainstream media, to look at the broadcast media, it was a done deal. It was a fact, the Russians were responsible. And another example was the very flimsy evidence, if you could call it that, to justify the airstrikes in Syria. Now, it seems to me what we're seeing there is, and of course, in relation to that Syria airstrike, people like me, and I know Jeremy at the time, were asking legitimate questions, and we were demonized for doing so. How dare we question that it was the Russians that were behind the Skripal poisoning? How dare we question the legitimacy of the airstrikes in Syria? Well, that brings me back to this attack on freedom of speech. It brings me back to the way in which Parliament is driven by PR and spin and so on. And I've been asking some questions, having been dedicated to the Labour Party for 44 years and being a strong advocate of democracy. Is our democracy fit for purpose? And frankly, I don't think it is. Representative democracy isn't representing us. I think we have to ask the question, who are they representing? Because if representative democracy was working, then we wouldn't have 14 million people in the 5th biggest economy in the world living in poverty. We wouldn't have thousands of people sleeping on the streets. Our public services wouldn't be in meltdown. We would have had a more coherent response to the COVID-19 crisis. And it seems to me much of the mainstream media is giving the government an easy ride on their ham-fisted handling of the COVID-19 crisis. Never mind the well over 100,000 deaths directly linked to the austerity measures that they've been pursuing. But we know that thousands of people have died needlessly as a consequence of this appalling virus because of the government's very poor handling of that crisis that we are now confronted with. And this is what I think the media needs to be making the case. On the Syria airstrike, just to go back to that for a moment, the OPCW, we now know, suppressed key information. So when we can't rely on an agency which should be unimpeachable, like the OPCW, and when we're not seeing the broadcast media, the mainstream print media, actually exposing that fact, then it's so important that we see these alternative platforms, these alternative media platforms actually being created. And I think it's also important on World Press Freedom Day that we make the argument and make the case for the democratization of our media, and that we break up the big media giants, and that we actually, put the power in the hands of the journalists. And this is something that Jeremy spoke about in a really important speech he made a couple of years ago. Perhaps another reason why he was targeted by the billionaire media barons, because he talked about democratizing the media, about electing the directors of the board of the governors of the BBC. He talked about creating properly funded, through top slicing the big media giants, media collectives to do investigative journalism at a local level. And obviously he was targeted for that. But all these abuses that we're seeing, the abuse of state power, the abuse of corporate power, which isn't being called to account by the mainstream, it brings me back to why we desperately need people like Julian, and why we absolutely, as Greg was saying, have to do all we possibly can to ensure that he doesn't face the extradition, which obviously the United States are pushing for, and it seems very powerful figures in this country are as well. And we have to speak out in unison, because here's a man who's been traduced more than probably anybody in history. And I'll just conclude by also reminding us about the way in which the British state is involved in manipulating facts through the social media and the alternative media platforms too. The British Army have got the 77th Brigade, and it has this rather benign sounding purpose, amongst other things, to support the counter-adversarial information activity. That's what one of the things they're doing. And then also we know that the government is funding organisations like the Institute for Statecraft. Multi-million pound contribution from the Foreign Office. They've had getting on for well over £500,000 from the Ministry of Defence too. And we know that they were smearing the leader of the opposition and key figures in the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader. And this is state-sponsored smearing of Jeremy Corbyn. And this is why, again, I come back to the point why voices like those of Julian Assange are so important, because they shine a light on these abuses of state and corporate power, and why they really are the very embodiment of what journalism, good quality journalism, should be all about. And so it's so important that on this day of all days that we come together to show our solidarity with Julian Assange, and we redouble our efforts to ensure that he doesn't face the extradition, which is potentially going to be subjected to unless we can, get a fair outcome, and is, as we know, languishing in solitary confinement, effectively being tortured by the British state. It's an absolute stain on the British society, a stain on all of us, really, and it's why I think we should all do everything we possibly can to make sure he's released.
Thank you, Chris. You're absolutely right. Could I just take a minute there to pause and to inform you about a few bits of information for those of you who are new to the case or who may not have looked at some of the information. There is a good selection of our man in court type explanations from our Scottish blogger, Craig Murray. And Craig and John were at the launch event for Scots Defend Assange. I remember coming up to Edinburgh to participate in that. And Craig's also, of course, going through a very difficult time right now because he's being targeted for the kind of journalism that he does. So it's on World Press Freedom Day. I think it's an important time to offer support to people like Craig, who have done a lot to expose what's really going on in the world. I'd also like to make the point that a good while ago, we were aware from the Stratfor leaks that this strategy of going after Julian Assange in terms of moving him from country to country, keeping his case in limbo, putting him in prison, targeting his family, as we know from the recent revelations from Stella Morris, his partner, is something that is planned. And what has happened is a kind of routinization of the horror and the hardship, much as it has happened in the mainstream with the routinization of homelessness and hunger and poverty. And these are things that we, whether we are on the left or on the right, must take very seriously, because we are becoming inert to the kind of hardship that we are seeing. And in particular, in the case of Julian Assange, prolonged psychological torture has serious effects on body parts, on your physiology. And right now, with the COVID-19 crisis raging through prisons and affecting prisons more, as Professor Richard Coker of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine has said in his recent report, Julian is at great risk. Not only is he not getting some of the contact with his lawyers, with his family, with his friends that you would get even as a prisoner who's in prison 23 hours a day, he's also got a chronic lung condition since 2012, and therefore is more susceptible to COVID. And this kind of brings us back to John White's point at the start of this meeting, pointing out that this is the slow motion execution of dissent, and we have to stand together to resist that. I'd like to start with a question for the panelists by asking, if I may, why it is you think that although 1,400 plus journalists around the world have signed a very strong letter under the Journalists Speak Up for Assange banner coordinated by Serena Tadari, whom I was telling you about earlier, condemning what is happening, and there's a good number of British signatories to that letter, why it is we're not hearing more about Julian's trial and what's going on with the extradition, because surely people should be concerned, if not about Julian, then about any perversions in the rule of law. So, Greg, you look like you're about to say something. Over to you.
I agree entirely. It's a total puzzle. But for someone who's worked there, it's understandable to a degree. I just wanted to pick up on something about the Labour leaked report, because there's a straight line between what is happening in that at a very parochial level compared to Julian Assange's plight. And as someone who was at the Sunday Times with people who expose the cash for questions and as Commons at the Telegraph for MPs' expenses, I've been telling anybody and everybody, all my friends and former colleagues who are still in Fleet Street in very senior positions, that this is the biggest political scandal of my life. It's the deliberate subversion of one of the world's greatest political parties for political ends. And for those of us who've been trying to write about it from first-hand experience, or speaking out individually, like some of us have done, certainly Chris and I, and this goes back years. But why, when you're sitting opposite a very senior Guardian journalist, an Observer journalist, it was an Observer journalist who, by the way, wrote all the anti-Corbyn stuff in Private Eye about everything that's gone on, and now Nick Cohen can be exposed for what he was, is that in cahoots with the anti-democratic forces within the Labour Party in this case. Within the Commons, for instance, the lobby closed shop. And then actually, as someone who, I used to work for the Daily Mail, I know exactly where some stories from the Labour Party came from when I was at the Daily Mail. They came from Labour MPs. Yeah. I said to one recently, I'm surprised that you and your parliamentary colleagues don't have a desk in the office of the Mail on Sunday, given how many leaks you get in every single week. Yes, and we all laughed. But actually, when you're sitting there, of course, is that you make judgments, but there's also having an angle and having something different. And I'm not saying what's gone on individually. I am shocked that the actual court cases aren't covered in detail and exposed, and all the stuff that everyone watching this and everyone on this panel, I'm sure, knows about. You guys more than I do, I'm sure. But it is shocking. And problem is it's not a story, because journalists like to either feed the constructed narrative that finds favor with their bosses and their colleagues and try and get an edge on it, or they try and do something that is totally against the narrative and is shocking and still fits in with a worldview. And it's very difficult just to have intelligent, measured, routine journalism about daily events. In other words, and often when the truth comes out, for instance, in the Labour leak report, it's almost too late. Every single one of those who are guilty from that report that I've studied, and I'm in the middle of a big blog post about this, have left the Labour Party employment, having had a decade of well-paid jobs, and working in political consultancies who now behind the scenes are what? Fixing the political approaches, working with corporates, and influencing an agenda behind the scenes about which we know nothing. And when we do find out about it, and we usually do, it's often too late. And just to highlight the unusualness of this, two people I've had the privilege of working with briefly and knowing informally, lightly, are Peter Hitchens and Peter Oborne. These are not what you would call left-wing journalists, but some of the work that they have done, particularly, I say, on the OPCW and the Middle East, has been phenomenal, really. And it's, I'm sure, and they've had to do it sometimes away from their main paid employment. But it does show that there are opportunities of chinks. But it does also show that how a number 10 briefing about COVID wants lobby correspondents to ask questions about a health issue they don't really understand, and are reluctant, you can see it, if a health service journal or a New Scientist journalist or a health editor asks them questions, because they actually know what they're asking about, what they're talking about. And so there's almost a cozy arrangement that allows nobody to rock the boat. Now that, of course, shows that when Jeremy Corbyn got traduced appallingly, and still people like, I'm sure, Chris and I and others active in the Labour Party supporting Jeremy, we knew that we'd seen nothing compared to what would have happened if he'd been standing at that podium outside number 10 on December the 20th. We would have literally have seen exposed the sort of stuff that goes on behind the scenes at the highest level. There's still always hope, but the real hope is in ourselves and making sure that we can, from the bottom up, create a global powerhouse that stops Julian Assange from being extradited. Locally, more parochially, that the whistleblower, whoever it was, who leaked the Labour report, I wish they'd done it a bit earlier, maybe before December the 19th, that they are not then targeted and their lives turned upside down. Nothing like happened to Julian. But we've seen it before, and sometimes 20, 30 years on afterwards, you know, after a Nelson Mandela, the people who were traduced and were the devil incarnate, suddenly 20, 30 years on, after they've left the scene or left power, whatever, they're global and national treasures. And I'm sure that history will treat Julian Assange very kindly. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that the present treats Julian Assange very kindly and very well. And tomorrow it does. And the best way is to keep him alive, keep him in this country, keep him out of prison. Those should be the three goals.
Thanks.
I'll say quick something on that one as well.
Please, Chris.
Yeah, briefly. I mean, I absolutely agree. You won't be surprised to hear with what Greg said in relation to the leaked report. And I don't think it is a parochial issue, actually, because what we're talking about is not just a subversion of the Labour Party. We're talking about the subversion of British democracy. And that's an absolute outrage and something that really should be headline news on the broadcast and indeed the print media. But I also want to give a shout out as well in terms of the work that's being done by people who don't necessarily share my political worldview on many issues, but Peter Hitchen and Peter Oban have done some excellent work. And I remember seeing a documentary that Peter Oban produced, I think it was 2009, about the Israeli lobby and their efforts at influencing the political agenda in this country. I mean, that was about 8 or 9 years before the lobby documentary that was produced by Al Jazeera. So yeah, no, those two are doing some excellent work, but there aren't enough of them. There aren't enough of them. And what you asked the question, you know, why aren't more of them speaking out for Julian? Well, Greg, I think, has answered that question, but I think it's a combination of factors. Certainly doesn't suit the narrative of the owners of the media, but I think it's also some fear about doing it, and well, bias as well. Actually, I think some actually do not enough of them anyway actually support and think it's the right thing that is actually happening, and sadly, many of those prominent individuals are in very influential positions in the media, and you know, I long for the day when we could get somebody like Greg or John Pilger or somebody, you know, as being the kind of anchor political correspondent for the BBC or something, somebody who could give a bit of balance. I mean, I'm not asking for bias, I'm just asking for balance, and sadly it's not there at the moment.
Thanks, Chris. Did you want to say something, John?
Yeah, I do. I think we have to look at the role of the security services, certainly in the UK, in neutering our mainstream media. And I'm talking about not individual journalists, but the editorial line. And this is a process that's been underway since the war in Iraq. And we saw the way that Greg Dykes was forced to resign because when his Director General during that war, because his coverage or the coverage of his news team was far too fierce for the liking of the Blair government surrounding issues. Dr. David Kelly's alleged suicide and the dodgy dossier that was compiled by Alistair Campbell, the then press secretary, and also Sir Richard Dearlove, who was then head of MI6. And so we know that there is an interpenetration between the mainstream media, its upper echelons, and the security services, to the point when on major stories, again concerning primarily foreign affairs, they act as a conduit for the security services to promote establishment orthodoxies onto the general public. And so it's a lack of accountability that has corroded our body politic and our society in general. And that's what Julian Assange did. He held those who were responsible for that to account with the publishing the collateral death war logs, the Iraqi war logs, and he paid the price for daring to do so. Nobody's been held to account. Not 1 second of justice has been faced by any of the prime movers behind the war in Iraq. Not 1 second of justice has been faced by any of the prime movers behind the destruction of Libya. Britain's role had been embedded with their Saudi counterparts in the war in Yemen. Britain's sordid role in Syria. At home, not one person's been held to account for Hillsborough, for Orgreave, for Grenfell, for Windrush. And I maintain that no one will be held account ultimately for the COVID-19 crisis that we're living through. Boris Johnson's criminal negligence should have seen him hounded out of office long before now. Yet, look at the coverage he's received in recent days in the news. First, we had the naming of the baby after some of the doctors responsible for his treatment when he was in hospital. Then today, we're getting the big riff of his brush with death interview. There's a cult of personality being built around this man. Corbyn was treated as an enemy of the people. He's not done one thing close to what Boris Johnson has done throughout his political career. Why is it that we have a media that's unable to hold these people to account in the proper way? Corbyn was deemed illegitimate from the beginning. He was deemed illegitimate by the media, political, security, military establishment, and they converged to bring to bear all the weight of their power to make sure that he never entered Downing Street for reasons that I have heard in my initial contribution. So individual journalism, journalists, there are a few good ones, but as Chris rightly says, there's not enough of them. But we know, and I hope Greg can speak to this, journalists working in various newsrooms self-censor. They know instinctively the parameters beyond which they cannot go when they're covering any story. And there is a lot of fear among journalists. And I know there will be journalists who will be having a crisis of conscience with some of these big issues, including the issue of Julian Assange. But just like Jeremy Corbyn was deemed illegitimate from the beginning, so was Julian Assange as a journalist. Mainstream journalism doesn't see Julian Assange as a journalist. They see him as some kind of outlier. And this is where we get the conflict between the old journalism, the legacy media, and social media, and people who set up their own blogs, like Craig Murray's been demonised heartily, and others who write independently and who gain great traction. And we know newspapers during this crisis are struggling. They're on their knees and they're begging. They've got their begging bowls out. The Guardian now solicits donations at the end of every story. When Seamus Milne was within the Guardian, it was a wonderful place for dissident voices. It was a real marketplace of ideas. Now it's become ever more turgid. It's driven by extreme centrism, and it's been leading the charge because it distorts and it confuses people who still see it as a home of progressive voices. So whether 1,400 journalists are joined together, that's a wonderful thing. But the fact that they're not getting an airing on this particular issue, I think, is very, very telling.
If I may, I think John's absolutely right. The big issue of self-censorship, which is incremental and minute in mini steps, and then suddenly you look back on a career and realise what just happened there. That's absolutely a risk. I just want to go back to the security services, because there's a long tradition of journalists and security services having a very cosy relationship of whatever sort. I mean, one of the early stories, Lashmar and Lee in The Observer in, I think, the 70s, was when the MI6 had an office in the BBC and put Christmas tree symbols on personnel files of people who were dodgy. I think it's fair to say that at every national newspaper I've worked, there is someone who has a special relationship with the British security services. It wouldn't surprise you otherwise because obviously when whatever happens, it's always good to have that hotline into wherever. I can say that it's absolutely certain in my mind that I worked at one newspaper where there was one person who was probably more than a cosy relationship with MI6. Sure as hell he wasn't a very good journalist and didn't really get that many stories in the paper, but he always seemed interested in what was going on. And we've seen it across the board. It's easy to get tarred with conspiracy theories because there's an awful lot of cock-ups and incompetence involved in this. But it would not surprise anyone at all that the security services are interested in what's going on in our newsrooms. And newsrooms want to have a special hotline to people in the security services who are, quotes, trusted sources. And that somehow that close relationship between the lobby and Parliament, between defence, I've got to be careful, but between specialist reporters and the security services, and it goes across the board, mean that stuff doesn't get reported because it's not in the longer term interests of that relationship. And usually the upper hand in that relationship is the power relationship. So definitely that will be the case. But I think self-censorship is absolutely much more of an important issue at the highest echelons of journalism, because there are people who know a lot of stuff and feel very good about it, that they know stuff that they just can't tell us. But when they're sitting in the bar or the meeting rooms or whatever, they have all sorts of information that somehow never quite makes it into print. And if you remember, Rupert Murdoch famously had in his bottom drawer information that has never come out, but was there just for a rainy day in case politician A or celebrity B or so-and-so D did something that they didn't like. So there's a lot going on there, but all we've got to do is believe in the truth, support people who want to get the raw data, the raw information out there, and then all of us can do our journalism. You know, all three of us, everyone here on the panel, can look at the Labour leak report. I agree with Chris. It is a shocking intrusion into democracy. But then it's almost like saying you seem to be some sort of conspiracy theorist if you believe that Mossad or the State of Israel involves itself in other countries' behaviors. I sat at the Sunday Times opposite the reporter who took the leak from the Israeli nuclear scientist about their illegal nuclear weapons, put him in a safe house in London, don't go into the details, but then Mossad came, it was in Italy, and grabbed him and took him back to Israel, and he's been imprisoned, and then he's basically imprisoned in Israel ever since. Now, yeah, exactly. So it is ludicrous to think that that doesn't happen. It is ludicrous to believe that there's some sort of massive global conspiracy that's something out there. The truth, as always, is complex, but that's what we need. And before we get to the truth, we need the evidence, and we get the evidence from digging, from our sources, from our documentation, and from speaking to people who are decent people. Because sure as hell, there's a lot of people at the top of our Labour Party and our government who are not decent people, and who similarly self-censored, turn a blind eye, push the law a bit. And that's our job as journalists, and that's what young journalists want to do coming into it. I wanted to change the world with a 4,000-word article in The Guardian. I'd read my George Orwell, yeah? Never worked for The Guardian, and even if I had, I don't think it would have changed the world. And certainly, I can't see The Guardian changing the world, or at least not for the better, anytime soon.
Could I just, at this point, just point out how global our audience is today? We've been talking about not being too parochial. We have a journalist I know whose name I recognize on the list, who's here from Nepal. We have people from Australia, from America, from other parts of the world. So it's really nice to have these conversations in a way that we know our discussions are shared, our views are shared, our thoughts are shared by others around the globe. Could I also point for those viewing on the live stream who are coming to this new, the works of John Pilger in relation to revealing the situation in Julian Assange, and also other respected sources such as Media Lens, who help to really question the narrative that we're hearing and to change that narrative. And we have about, we said we'll try and finish on the hour, but given the quality of the speakers, if with everybody's permission, I'd like to continue for a further 7 minutes to about 5:05. And I'd like to put to the panel two questions from the floor. So the question from Gareth Watson is it journalism when what little we hear in our press is a narrative with quotes, and the word narrative in quotes? Example, wanted on sexual assault charges, holed up in the embassy. He says he is not a journalist, but he is of sound mind, and he's able to see the fog of this narrative. So why can't the journalists? And I think you've answered some of that. And one of the other questions he asks, which I think we haven't yet answered, is, do they not fear for themselves as journalists while seeing Julian's predicament? And I wonder if the panel can opine on that before we go to the next question.
I think if Julian Assange made any mistake, it was confusing the belief that he lived in a free society with acting as if he lived in a free society. And the gulf between both is where the struggle is. we must be able to act freely. We must be able to expose the high crimes and war crimes of those in power. We must be able to hold the powerful to account. And I'll never forget when I watched the footage of Julian Assange being ripped from the Ecuadorian embassy, and I said this in a talk I gave in London, a chill really did slide down my spine. It was an act of fascism at that moment. It really was, in cahoots with the Ecuadorian government at the time in return for granting of US aid, and in cahoots with Washington and the British government. His political asylum was removed. That is a violation of international law. And it seems to me the whole international rules-based order, so-called, has collapsed. But Julian Assange's plight a clear symptom of that. And I think this speaks to the crisis within the crisis of coronavirus, which is the ongoing decline of US imperial power in our world. And so this is an interregnum we're in. I hesitate to use the overused quote of Antonio Gramsci, but this really is the dying of the old and the struggle of the new to be born. And so Julian Assange's helped to remove the cloak of US imperial power, as I say, to show its savage nature, its reality. And if you think about the difference between the way that the wars have been covered since Vietnam and how that after the Vietnam War, the US political establishment was never able to embark on such a large deployment of hard power for over 3 decades until the first Gulf War in 1991. They even called it the Vietnam Syndrome. And that's because there was no embedded media covering the Vietnam War. There was great coverage of the atrocities, the realities of that war on the ground, which catalyzed an ever more militant and growing anti-war movement in the US itself. And that was an international movement. It was very militant in this country, led by the likes of Tariq Ali, I recall. And so the difference in the quality of reporting and the ability to get at the truth, even if journalists want to get at the truth, is huge between the 60s and now. And that's why the lack of accountability made sure that even after the horrors of the Iraq War, which Julian Assange helped to highlight, that the British government in 2001 was able to embark on another war in cahoots with France and the US and NATO and destroy Libya, do the same thing again. And that's what's up to journalists to hold the power to account, to make sure that they pay a heavy price for embarking on those crimes in our name, because it stains us. It's a stain on all of us as citizens of a country that is able to go to take these matters into its hands and unleash hell on other countries and other peoples. Or to the question of am I scared? I personally am not, because there's nothing I say that I would not be willing to say in any court of law. I am not breaking the law. We have to assert our rights in order to maintain them, and their right to free speech is one that we must hold and cherish most dear. So I will go to my grave speaking my truth to power, and no one will ever censor me in that regard.
Thanks, John. Chris, were you about to say something? But before we go to that, could I just point to the speakers that there is one other question which you can see in your Q&A tab, which says, we've passed motions in our Labour Party branches and CLPs in support of Julian. With Starmer now leader, how effective does the panel think this course of action could now be? Is it a forlorn hope to think new leadership of the Labour Party could be pressured into acting in defence of Julian? And this is the question from Brighton, and Trevor. Thank you very much, Trevor. And could I ask the other panelists if they could probably comment on both questions, one on why journalists are not fearing what's happening to Julian, and the second on whether we can pressure the Labour Party leadership into taking a stance against Julian's extradition?
Well, I'm pretty sure that definitely fear is playing a role, and what it's obvious to me anyway is that they're trying to use Julian as an example. Anybody else who dares to put their head above the parapet, it will be shot off, and this is what they're doing to Julian. And I think there is a real sense of fear. But you know, I would have hoped that people who go into the journalistic profession would have been able to rise above that, because it is about cutting through. It is about standing, or it should be anyway, standing up for free speech. And I mean, and John talked about the rules-based order. There is no rules-based order. That is a con, and I think this is why again we need people like Julian Assange to actually shine a light on that confidence trick that there was some sort of rules-based order. It was rules-based, set by the likes of Henry Kissinger and beyond for the United States and their imperialist allies to wreak havoc and inflict death and misery on hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world, death and suffering. I mean, you know, look, the United States of America under the successive administrations is a terrorist state, if we're honest about it, when you think of the terrorism that they've inflicted, not just in Vietnam, on Iraq, and, you know, you name it, right around the world. And indeed, Britain's record is similarly tarnished in that way. And lots of this is, of course, unknown to people. And this is why it was such a revelation, you know, when Julian Assange came along and exposed in the way in which he did. As for, you know, campaigning inside the Labour Party now, and is it a forlorn hope? Yes, I regret to say I think it is. And I'm somebody who gave 44 years of my life to the Labour Party as a dedicated activist. And I absolutely believed in the Labour Party and always thought that, although I felt it could have gone further in some areas, that, you know, it was a force for good. I really don't believe it is anymore. And I think in terms of passing motions at Labour Party meetings, it will be disregarded, ignored. And look, even when we had Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of our party and Diane Abbott as the shadow Home Secretary, they didn't speak out as much as, in my opinion, they could indeed should have done. I mean, I was delighted when Jeremy did say what he said about Julian when he was dragged from the Ecuadorian embassy. I was pleased that Diane made a contribution in the House, but they got absolutely pilloried by the most of the parliamentary Labour Party, certainly pilloried, you know, by sections of the media. And I don't know whether that was why they didn't say anything more. It was great that they said what they did, but the present shadow cabinet, the present leader, I absolutely think you're whistling in the wind if you think we're going to get any change from them in relation to Julian Assange. We have to do it for ourselves. We have to band together. We have to, through our collective solidarity, demand that you know, the justice is done and that Julian is released and that we treat him as the hero that he is.
Thanks, Chris. I'd also like to just point to people to the work being done through Mark Curtis and Declassified, who have revealed certain conflicts of interests, serious conflicts of interest 3 times around, and within the judiciary in terms of concerns about both the you know, poor practice and lack of due process, plus other things. I'd also like to point to newer independent media outlets like The Canary, and encourage people to support alternative media in order that we can hear these alternative voices. And I'd like if Greg could say a few final words before we bring this to a close, because we're a further 2 minutes over our 17:05 deadline.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with Chris, but I'm going to say something different. The disappointment of the Labour Party today is that 500,000 people as members are not getting involved in it on a routine basis. The disappointment of the last couple of years is that we've gone in Brighton and Hove from having hundreds and hundreds of people, even hundreds of people at branch meetings, to going back to 1990, 2005 levels of 10 or 15 people sitting in a hall on a wet Wednesday evening, usual suspects. But of course, even then, with 500,000 members, even with only 5% of them turning up to meetings to discuss a motion, it is still a channel of communication that means we have to have a voice in every single one of those branches and in every single one of those halls, even though, as I suspect, hundreds of those voices are likely to be expelled before the end of the year. We'll have no choice about being a voice, not least by appearing in Zoom meetings with people who are no longer in the Labour Party, etc. So I do think it's important. And I know that Trevor and other people in Brighton are doing a fantastic job in speaking to anybody and everybody. But that's not just ticking up motion passes, nem con, let's move on. It's about arguing the case, educating it, and leading to other courses of action inside and outside of the Labour Party. And that, if it has any role, is the role it will have in the dark days that are coming ahead. I'd just like to answer the other point, if I could remember what it was, because I had something to say about that. The other.
Why are journalists scared?
Oh,
are journalists scared?
I think it's more in terms of to encourage the others, is to stop people, the Julian Assanges, the countless Julian Assanges out there who now have a route to market for stuff they know. And that really the fear of journalists is that disempowers them, because the stuff gets out there and they've missed the boat. Whereas when they were in control of the material and their sources and the publication and the distribution and the bylines and the interpretation, they were in a position of power. So it's a very similar thing. So there is a fear. The other thing is just to realize that,
sorry, Greg, maybe I'm
just to say, the last thing is that it's a lot easier for people who have left mainstream journalism behind, like me or John Pilger or others, of people of a certain age who are of a certain class and prosperity or whatever, to be brave in retrospect. And I'm sure we all have, I'm not being horrible about that. But when you're there as a young journalist wanting to make your mark, earning money that you need to rent your flat, these are not highly paid people, then of course there is incremental, not cowardice, but fear that keeps, and some people cross the line, just think, sorry, that's it, I'm leaving. It's a step too far. And we need both. But we need Julian Assanges by the score, by the hundreds, with voices like ours, putting the information out there by whatever means necessary, even in the Labour Party and any other party.
I think the question actually was whether they don't fear for themselves as journalists when they don't speak up for Assange. And I think we could talk about that for another half an hour.
Journalists aren't scared of going into war zones, into civil war zones, being tracked and hunted by criminals and gangs, etc., by terror, whatever. There's lots of journalists like that. We need more of them. But we need certainly to rethink and reimagine how media works within a capitalist society. But fundamentally, we want to get rid of the capitalist society.
Yes, and we need the voices like
We'll do that next week.
Tariq Haddad, Moel Mazi, John McAvoy, lots of these young voices who are coming through, who are making critical statements. For example, Barnaby Nabarka's excellent live feeding, which he gives us through Ruptly and others. So thank you to all the journalists, including the wonderful Stefania Maurizi, whose freedom of information requests broke open much of this case. Our solidarity with Julian Assange. He can't hear us from this, but we hope that somebody in his team is hearing us and is taking back to him how much support he has within the wider community at a time when it must clearly be a very dark place for him. So my thanks to our guests around the world, both on the feed and via Zoom. My thanks to our speakers, Chris, Greg, and John. And we look forward to welcoming you to further Free the Truth and Scots Defend Assange events. There's going to be an event on the Spanish case in relation to the spying on Julian Assange. There's going to be an event on whistleblowing. There's also going to be an event on spin. So we urge you to follow. You can follow me on Deepa_driver on Twitter for some of these events. And of course, Don't Extradite Assange campaign and the Wikileaks handles, which give the official information, of course, the Courage Foundation. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And I'm now going to end this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Dittatura del pensiero unico.
Che purtroppo abbiamo subito anche come pagina Facebook. Tengo a ricordare questo aspetto che ci ha visto appunto colpiti dalla censura in occasione di un presidio a cui stavamo partecipando a inizio gennaio contro l'aggressione militare degli Stati Uniti verso l'Iran, e siamo stati completamente bannati da Facebook come pagina Comitato per la Liberazione.
Figuriamoci. Wikileaks nasce nel 2006 e nasce praticamente in sordina, perché all'inizio le sue prime denunce sono, che ne so, un leader islamista somalo che ha assassinato degli ufficiali governativi, oppure delle denunce sul background di banche un po' svizzere, tipo che la Julius Baer, oppure altre cose minori, insomma. E finché Assange ha denunciato cose di secondo piano non è successo assolutamente niente. I casini sono cominciati nel 2010, quando escono i diari di guerra afghani. Ora, le denunce sono pesantissime, dettagliatissime, nelle quali io veramente non mi dilungo perché ci vuole un libro. Però una cosa vorrei portare all'attenzione di chi ci ascolta. Cioè, la cosa più importante che è venuta fuori, anche se non è stata sottolineata, è il fatto che dopo 9 anni, stiamo parlando del 2010, quindi 9 anni, o possiamo dire oggi, dopo 19 anni, 2020, dopo 9 anni di guerra, di una guerra sanguinosa che aveva prodotto vittime a non finire, gli equilibri sul campo di battaglia non erano cambiati, zero. Eppure, nonostante non cambiasse niente, la guerra continuava. Tanto che uno si domandava a un certo punto, ma sarà veramente i talebani l'obiettivo di questa guerra? Oppure la guerra è fine a se stessa? Ed ecco che qui dobbiamo rispolverare George Orwell, no, nella sua immaginaria neanche tanto purtroppo oggi, Oceania, no, perennemente in guerra, dove lui dice: non importa che la guerra vada bene o vada male, l'importante è che uno stato di belligeranza sia persistente. Perché? Perché durante la guerra, o non solo la guerra, quando ci sono situazioni di pericolo, il cittadino normale, la gente comune, è pronta a barattare la libertà per la sicurezza.
Certo, l'abbiamo visto.
All'uomo della strada non interessa assolutamente niente che una casta ristrettissima di persone, di un'elite ristrettissima gestisca un potere enorme. Lo intravede come alla fine una situazione che gli dà la garanzia di sopravvivenza. Questo è
avvenuto dopo l'11 settembre.
Esatto. Come l'11, ce ne sono così di esempi. Cioè, voglio dire, parliamoci chiaro, per molti anche il Covid-19, se guardiamo cosa è successo per esempio in Ungheria, Orban, cioè, e non è l'unico che sta prendendo, nelle Filippine stanno utilizzando uno stato di pericolo per comunque accentrare i poteri, anche se questo non succede. Quindi questo è molto importantissimo. Julian Assange comincia a farsi dei nemici, e se pensate che dopo i diari di guerra lui comincia a sparare gli afghani, comincia a sparare i diari di guerra iracheni con video tipo collateral murder, e qui credo che tutti sappiano di che cosa si parla, a questo punto è chiaro che l'odio nei suoi confronti cresceva. Poi decide di attaccare Hillary Clinton, i background piuttosto opachi, i suoi finanziamenti opachi, poi se la prende i cable diplomatici, e poi se la prende addirittura con la CIA e pubblica i manuali di istruzione, tecnici di istruzione di hackeraggio, come la CIA praticamente esfiltra dati e li manda sui server a Langley. Quindi Julian Assange a questo punto si fa dei nemici, fra cui la CIA. E
non solo Julian Assange, perché ha citato il caso afghano e anche Chelsea Manning.
Chelsea Manning è stata la sua fonte, sì.
Ha rischiato grosso.
È la sua fonte principale, una donna che va portata, io credo, a esempio per il suo coraggio, ma veramente a dei livelli estremi. Lei va veramente onorata, nel senso che è proprio per onestà intellettuale che manda i documenti a Julian Assange, perché sa che vuole la verità deve essere pubblicata. Finisce in galera in situazioni disumane e spaventose, tanto che devono intervenire personaggi di tutti i livelli. Tenta 2 volte suicidio, ottiene la grazia da Barack Obama, esce e accetta, non sapendo di dove doveva tornare, di tornare in prigione pur di non compromettere Julian Assange e pur di non denunciarlo e pur di non dare degli strumenti contro di lui. E infatti tenta un terzo suicidio, poi arrestato un'altra volta, fino a veramente poche settimane fa, quindi quando un giudice di cuore decide che era basta così e Chelsea Manning è fuori finalmente.
Ha dovuto, per integrare, ha dovuto pure pagare oltre $250.000 per la cauzione.
Sì, ma hanno fatto una colletta.
C'è stata la solidarietà da parte.
Posso usare il termine, l'amore che riscuote questa donna è veramente incredibile e se lo merita tutto. E se lo merita tutto. Ok.
Franco?
Sì, scusate, ma a proposito dell'Afghanistan, dei 9 anni in cui non era sostanzialmente accaduto nulla, e di quello che è degli Afghanistan Papers, vorrei raccontare una storia, perché lo so che io di solito non racconto spesso storie personali, però credo sia esemplificativa di quello che succede quando si indaga su alcune cose. Allora, io ho realizzato, più o meno era il 2010, un documentario, un film d'inchiesta che si chiama Afghanistan, ed è esattamente perché all'epoca, dopo 9 anni di guerra, non solo guerra nella quale, vorrei ricordare, quasi tutti i paesi del pianeta avevano invaso l'Afghanistan, quindi stiamo parlando delle forze armate della terra, che non stanno combattendo contro i marziani, ma stanno combattendo contro dei pecorai. Hanno invaso l'Afghanistan e dopo 9 anni i pecorai stanno battendo le forze armate del pianeta, che era una cosa assurda. Allora sono andato lì e ho cercato in questo film io indago e cerco io e tutte le altre persone che hanno collaborato con me, insomma, cerchiamo di raccontare il perché di questa cosa. Scopro un sacco di cose, ci sono tanti perché. Non è un caso che la guerra nel 2020 ancora non si è vinta. C'è un motivo ben preciso e probabilmente se qualcuno non deciderà di mettergli fine, nel 2050 ancora staremmo a combattere in Afghanistan. Più si prolunga e meglio è, mettiamola così. Fatto sta che vado lì, io vado per conto mio, non vado protetto alle forze armate come vanno i soliti inviati di guerra, prendo un aereo, arrivo a Dubai, da Dubai prendo un volo diretto per Kabul, giro per l'Afghanistan, quando sto per ripartire, l'aeroporto di Kabul, immaginate, è una sorta di sequenza senza fine di metal detector e di posti di blocco. Non so, ci saranno una 20-30 controlli, non sto scherzando, cioè ogni tipo 5 metri c'è un metal detector, c'è posti di blocco, devi sfogliare, cosare, ti controllano passaporto, e si va avanti così in continuazione. Arrivo a un certo punto a uno di questi posti, l'ennesimo posto di blocco, eravamo io e il mio amico fotografo che era venuto insieme a me, e ci bloccano, noi gli diamo i passaporti, ci dicono no, aspettate un attimo, qui ci fanno mettere da una parte, e spariscono. Aspetto 5 minuti, così. Diciamo che uno dei motivi per cui ho sempre portato a casa la pelle di tanti scene di guerra in cui sono stato, perché in questi casi divento sospettoso. Allora c'era un bancone con dietro tipo bancone della reception, tanto per capirsi. Allora sporgo la testa e vedo che c'è un foglio scritto che sembrava una lista. Il Dari, cioè la lingua che si parla in Afghanistan, è una lingua a me incomprensibile, però si scrive come l'arabo. Allora, questa cosa aveva, io l'arabo, avendolo studiato un po', insomma, quantomeno lo so leggere. Ecco.
Era comprensibile.
Sì, quindi a un certo punto vedo questa lista e c'era scritto in testa, era una scritta in inglese, c'era scritta blacklist. Poi sotto c'era questa lunga lista e io vedo che in questa lista c'è il mio nome scritto in arabo, in Dari, cioè in arabo. Mi prendo un colpo. Mi prendo un vero colpo. Perché evidentemente mi aspettavano, cioè il fatto che io fossi andato lì, io sono potuto entrare, cioè nessuno mi ha rotto le scatole per entrare, però andando in giro io ho fatto un sacco di domande, ho incontrato un sacco di gente, sono andato a vedere tanti posti, evidentemente questa cosa qui non è stata bene anche per le cose che poi riportato a casa, e quindi sono stato inserito in questa lista. E diciamo che a un certo punto ho fatto una scena, ho dovuto mettere su una scena da film, di quelle in cui ho cominciato a urlare, saltare. Immaginate, c'era una fila lunghissima di gente, perché tutti quanti questi posti di blocco c'era una fila interminabile di persone che lentamente passava un posto di blocco appresso l'altro, erano quasi tutti americani, devo dire, erano pochissimi non statunitensi, quasi tutti statunitensi, molti militari e anche gente, non lo so, di cosa, insomma, imprenditori della CIA o che altro. E ho cominciato a urlare, a saltare, ho cominciato a dire mi voglio portare via, qui cosa. dei militari afghani mi sono saltati letteralmente addosso, mi volevo trascinare via, io più mi trascinavano via più urlavo, e devo dire che grazie a questa cosa a un certo punto si è creato il panico dentro questo aeroporto e sono intervenute tante persone e di fronte a quello non hanno più potuto fare nulla, cioè non è che dovevano giustificare la cosa, e quindi in quella maniera sono riuscito a sfangarla. Però ho raccontato questo episodio per far capire quanto è delicato, quanto sono delicate due cose. Primo, raccontare, cercare di andare a cercare cose che non si devono raccontare in giro. Si possono fare attraverso una piattaforma informatica come Wikileaks, oppure di persona. Ecco. E la seconda è che l'Afghanistan, visto che non è un caso che tutti i guai sono cominciati all'Afghanistan, perché l'Afghanistan è uno di quei buchi neri non solo della nostra recente storia, ma anche dell'informazione, perché dell'Afghanistan non si sa nulla, non viene mai raccontato. E l'Afghanistan è diventato una sorta di centro del pianeta, cioè quello che succede lì è veramente come una sorta di
una sorta di buco nero dove tutto sparisce.
No, io direi una cosa differente, una sorta di microcosmo del pianeta in cui si combattono tutte le battaglie geopolitiche del pianeta, si combattono all'interno dell'Afghanistan. È uno dei motivi per cui la guerra è infinita, cioè la Russia invece di combattere contro gli Stati Uniti, la Cina, l'India contro il Pakistan o chiunque altro ce l'abbia con qualcuno,
gli equilibri nascono da lì.
Combattiamoci in Afghanistan, tanto non gliene frega niente a nessuno degli afghani, ci possiamo pure scannare laggiù. E capire quello che sta accadendo lì vuol dire capire quello che accade nel mondo, e quindi non è un caso che i guai a Assange siano arrivati dall'Afghanistan. Ecco, volevo dire questo.
Vero.
Grazie.
È anche al centro delle rotte energetiche, gasdotti, oleodotti, praticamente devono transitare da lì, insomma. E questo è uno degli interessi delle grandi potenze occidentali sull'Afghanistan. Ma allora proseguo e finisco il mio intervento. Quindi praticamente a questo punto, dopo essere diventato il nemico pubblico numero uno, Julian Assange viene trascinato a forza fuori dall'ambasciata ecuadoregna e rinchiuso nel carcere di massima sicurezza di Belmarsh. Avviene perché c'è un cambio al vertice. Lenin Moreno, il nuovo presidente, revoca il diritto di asilo che gli era stato concesso da Rafael Correa e a questo punto autorizza la polizia britannica ad entrare a trascinare fuori Julian Assange.
Ma per quale motivo?
Che il cambio Prego?
Scusami Germana, per quale motivo secondo te c'è stato quindi anche un cambio all'interno delle politiche ecuadoriane?
No, vabbè, i presidenti vanno, vengono, sì, poi quanto le nuove elezioni siano giuste, non giuste, fair, no. Questo non lo sappiamo. Comunque c'è un nuovo presidente, ma la cosa il motivo essenziale è che in cambio del consegnare alle autorità britanniche e al carcere di massima sicurezza di Belmarsh Assange, Lenin Moreno si becca 4,2 miliardi di finanziamenti dal Fondo Monetario Internazionale. Quindi, voglio dire, è chiaro che è stato pagato. Assange è dentro questo carcere, che è un carcere che abitualmente ospita serial killer, trafficanti di droga e terroristi. E allora qui c'è una cosa molto interessante, perché non è che ci si deve stupire. Ancora Edward Snowden ci spiega il motivo per il quale Edward Snowden, che poi ci ha rivelato il vero volto del Grande Fratello, rivela anche un servizio di sorveglianza di massa britannico che è omologo del Prisma americano, si chiama Tempora, e in base a questo i giornalisti investigativi sono considerati una minaccia, una delle più grosse minacce allo Stato, e loro sono inseriti in una lista con hacker e terroristi. E questa è una cosa sconvolgente.
Franco, volevi integrare?
Scusate, oggi è non so, il festival degli episodi della mia vita. Per un altro film d'inchiesta fatto su Al-Qaeda, stavo a Londra e stavamo, insomma, io e tutti quanti gli altri lavoravano con me, stavamo a Londra per indagare, e a un certo punto pure una cosa da film accade, cioè noi eravamo usciti da un'intervista, stavamo andando a un'altra intervista. Improvvisamente sopra di noi arriva un elicottero, ci superano automobili da tutte le parti, isolano l'area, ci fermano letteralmente, ci fanno scendere dall'automobile e noi non capivamo che cosa stesse accadendo. Peraltro all'epoca, adesso è una cosa quasi normale che le telecamere per strada ti filmino, ma all'epoca, stiamo parlando del 2011, mi fanno scendere, era una strada, un lunghissimo rettilineo, e mi dicono guarda in quella direzione, non c'era nulla, io guardo in quella direzione e serviva, poi ho capito dopo, c'era una telecamera che mi ha sostanzialmente fotografato e mi ha riconosciuto. Questo era lo scopo di guardare in quella direzione. Fatto sta, per farla breve, ci portano a una centrale di polizia e ci rilasciano a me e alle altre persone un foglio di carta in cui c'era scritto che io ero un terrorista internazionale. Esattamente per far capire come vengono trattati i giornalisti d'inchiesta.
Vabbè,
Io sono tornato,
sono
una cosa di cui andare anche un po' orgogliosi.
Sono medaglie al petto, infatti, sono medaglie al petto.
Esattamente, io sono paragonato a Osama Bin Laden o al-Baghdadi o chissà che altro.
Sì, ma credo che un giornalista investigativo è più pericoloso di un Osama Bin Laden, parliamoci chiaro.
È meno strumentale sicuramente. Sicuramente è meno funzionale a certi scopi.
È meno organico, diciamo così.
E prima di ritornare a te, Germana, passerei la parola ad Agata Iacono.
Sì, sì, io mi sono venute in mente delle cose mentre Germana e Franco parlavano. Pensavo a come effettivamente il giornalismo d'inchiesta, quello vero, ha una particolarità, riesce a collegare una serie di puntini che altrimenti con il pensiero unico e l'informazione unidirezionale non si collegano. Cioè, stavate parlando dell'Afghanistan come microcosmo, ha parlato Franco, no? E io pensavo alla Siria, laddove si combattono tutta una serie di guerre, perché è una guerra infinita quella della Siria, dove le varie forze in campo si scontrano, perché certo ci sono le linee energetiche dei gasdotti, c'è la Turchia che sta portando i cosiddetti ribelli siriani in Libia. Se non conosciamo tutto questo panorama, no? Inseriamo in una visione geopolitica globale il tutto, non riusciamo neanche a capire perché Moreno è stato un traditore. Cioè, in Ecuador è avvenuto un colpo di Stato.
Sì.
E Rafael Correa lo denuncia tutt'oggi. Non più su Facebook, sta adoperando VK, ma è una serie infinita di informazioni.
Certo.
Oscurato, minacciato, così come siamo minacciati tutti quelli che cerchiamo di unire i puntini. Questo volevo dire, e questa è la cosa importante, cioè cercare di inquadrare qualunque situazione in un contesto molto...
Avere una visione d'insieme, perché Assange, tu hai appena citato il tradimento.
Assange è un simbolo rispetto a questo.
Cioè, tu hai citato, adesso non voglio aprire una grandissima parentesi, però hai citato il caso di Lenin Moreno, un colpo di Stato di fatto, senza sparare un colpo, senza proprio liscio come olio.
Guarda caso Moreno, appena salito al potere, riconosce Guaidó.
Infatti, la stessa cosa è avvenuta in Brasile, in Venezuela, la stessa cosa è avvenuta, hanno cercato di fare in Siria, dove Wikileaks ha divulgato le informazioni su come hanno falsificato la commissione che stava indagando
sulle armi chimiche,
gas e attacchi chimici attribuiti alle forze governative, ma Wikileaks ha ribaltato, ha smontato questa menzogna. Oppure, per finire la parentesi, per concludere la parentesi, il caso in Ucraina, un colpo di Stato di 6 anni fa, dove sempre Wikileaks ci ha mostrato come ci fu un terzo soggetto che intervenì a sparare sia sui poliziotti che sui manifestanti durante Euromaidan. Tra l'altro, ne approfitto per ricordare che ieri erano 6 anni da una strage che pochi giornalisti d'inchiesta hanno ricordato, la strage di Odessa, dove manifestanti contro il colpo di Stato in Ucraina sono stati bruciati vivi e finiti a colpi di manganellate e di voltella.
Noi abbiamo pubblicato Giulietto Chiesa su Odessa.
C'è chi ha fatto un lavoro
Io tra
più
l'altro mi ritrovo sulla blacklist ucraina senza essere mai andata in Ucraina. Quindi evidentemente fa paura la verità, è un gesto rivoluzionario.
Fa paura la verità.
Certo.
È proprio questo.
Franco Fracassi nuovamente, poi ripasserei la parola a Germano.
No, mi viene da ridere perché racconto il terzo episodio della mia vita.
Potremmo scrivere un libro, Germano, prossimo libro sulla vita di Franco, mi raccomando.
Invece di parlare di Julian Assange, alla fine si finisce per parlare di me. No, però a proposito dell'Ucraina, visto che si è parlato della strage di Odessa, io fui invitato nel maggio del 2015, quindi un anno dopo quella strage, dal comune di Odessa, cioè il sindaco di Odessa mi contattò perché dovevano anzi dovevano ricordare, scusate la parola, dovevano ricordare la strage che, vorrei ricordare, è la più sanguinosa strage avvenuta in Europa dopo la seconda guerra mondiale, oltre Srebrenica. Sono morte oltre 300 persone torturate, stuprate, sgozzate e poi bruciate vive per quelle che erano riuscite a sopravvivere. Visto che avevo, insomma, il Comune di Odessa doveva ricordare questa cosa, ha scelto come giornalista internazionale, doveva scegliere un giornalista internazionale perché parlasse dal palco, e mi hanno contattato perché ero forse, detta loro, la persona che si era occupata di più di questa vicenda. Ovviamente, avendomi invitato a Odessa, mi pagano il biglietto aereo, tutto quanto, e il trasferimento fino a Odessa. Mi imbarco sull'aereo, arrivo a Kiev per prendere la coincidenza per Odessa. Appena mi presento al controllo passaporti, il militare del controllo passaporti gentilmente mi chiede di seguirlo e finisco in una prigione, sostanzialmente, una prigione tutta vetri. Insieme mi sono trovato a passare poi tutto il tempo c'erano, adesso vado a memoria, una serie di trafficanti di droga, prostitute, cioè, gente, la classica prigione si vede nei film statunitensi, nei film americani, dove c'è la cella diurna con 5-10 persone dentro, ognuno diverso dall'altro. Ecco, una cosa del genere, con fuori una persona con un mitra che ci osservava. A un certo punto vengo interrogato perché vengo portato in un'altra stanzetta, che era la stanzetta dei servizi segreti ucraini, e alla domanda ma a che titolo mi tenete qui, cioè che cosa ho fatto, che crimine ho commesso, loro mi girano il computer e sul computer appaiono dei miei articoli. Ho scritto gli articoli, e allora la risposta è stata: lei è nemico del popolo ucraino. Devo dire, in quel caso devo ringraziare, veramente devo ringraziare, lo ringrazierò per tutta la vita, anche se oramai è tardi, cioè l'ho già fatto, però insomma ormai di persona non posso più fare, Giulietto Chiesa, perché io chiamai, mi lasciarono il cellulare, quindi io chiamai mia moglie, lei poi chiamai Giulietto Chiesa, insomma si mobilitò il Ministero degli Esteri. Fatto sta che a un certo punto riuscirono in qualche modo, dopo ore e ore e ore di trattative molto complesse, a tirarmi fuori, e non sto qui a fare lunga, però insomma diciamo che da quello che si è capito dopo, io stavo in questa lista nera del governo ucraino, io, mia moglie e mio figlio che all'epoca aveva 3 anni, tutte e 3 in questa lista nera, e mi hanno detto, l'ambasciatore italiano a Kiev mi ha detto chiaramente che se io fossi, perché ero libero a un certo punto di andare a Odessa, di girare per l'Ucraina dopo questa lunga peripezia, ha detto: guardi, se lei prova ad andare in giro troverà sicuramente un passante che a un certo punto gli tira una coltellata, perché qua funziona così. L'Ucraina è esattamente come il Salvador degli anni '80, insomma, o il Cile di Pinochet. Quindi se ne vada via al più presto. Infatti sono protetto dall'ambasciata italiana per poter poi ritornare in Italia. Però questo per far capire come per l'ennesima volta, ma se volevo citare tantissimi episodi, Assange è la summa di tutte quante queste cose, forse diciamo il vertice di questa piramide, la punta dell'iceberg di questo mondo del giornalismo non asservito, più che oltre che di inchiesta, non asservito al potere, mettiamola così, quanto oggi questa cosa possa dar fastidio, e i giornalisti si facevano fuori anche prima, per carità. Prima anzi si uccidevano, adesso si uccidono un po' di meno rispetto a prima. Però prima non fosse altro perché c'era internet, perché non c'era internet, perché mi spiace, ma internet è un grande massificatore di idee, c'era più pluralità e quindi era più facile raccontare certe cose e c'erano più voci, soprattutto più voci ascoltate, non più voci che parlassero. Adesso ce ne sono tante, ma nessuno le ascolta. E alla fine si rischia di finire in questa maniera, cioè dentro un carcere, senza che nessuno sappia nulla, oppure chissà dove, o come Julian Assange, magari condannato a morte per essere un terrorista, o a chissà quanti ergastoli per essere un terrorista senza aver mai ucciso nessuno né programmato di uccidere nessuno.
Infatti, passerei di nuovo la parola a Germana, poi ci torniamo con Franco sui cambiamenti dovuti all'avvento di internet nel mondo dell'informazione. Germana, prego.
Riprendo dal racconto di Franco, la verità fa paura, e questo è il motivo per cui Julian Assange, che ha infranto questo muro di menzogne che è stato eretto a legittimazione delle attività e degli uomini che stanno nella stanza del potere, questa oligarchia elitarie. E quando si vedono un personaggio che sbugiarda la loro retorica, è chiaro, con l'arma della verità, è chiaro che questo fa una paura tremenda. E infatti adesso Assange sta in questo carcere di massima sicurezza per un motivo solo, per essere estradato negli Stati Uniti. Ma questa è una cosa di una pericolosità enorme, perché non è solo un attacco ad Assange, è un attacco alla libertà di stampa, di espressione, ma c'è qualche cosa d'altro. Se Assange fosse veramente estradato negli Stati Uniti, implicherebbe che gli Stati Uniti si sono arrogati il diritto di giurisdizione universale di tutto il pianeta e su tutti noi. Cioè, un domani possono venire a prendere Mete, chiunque di noi, giornalisti, scrittori, insegnanti, avvocati, chiunque non rompa la dittatura del pensiero unico, può essere preso e estradato. Julian Assange non è americano, Julian Assange è un editore australiano che lavorava in Europa. Quindi io vorrei che qualcuno mi spiegasse quale, comunque mal riposto, dovere di lealtà poteva mai avere verso un paese che non era nemmeno il suo. Questa è la gravità assoluta. Cioè,
tra l'altro, ipocrisia nell'ipocrisia.
Sì.
Il giudice che sta seguendo la questione per l'estradizione, quando gli hanno rivolto la domanda sulla possibilità di usufruire, di utilizzare il primo emendamento, che sintetizzo, dalla possibilità ai giornalisti di controllare i governanti, che è stato già utilizzato in passato durante la guerra in Vietnam, la risposta che è stata data è che, essendo cittadino australiano, non può essere tutelato da questo diritto. Cioè, c'è l'ipocrisia nell'ipocrisia, la contraddizione nella contraddizione. Stai chiedendo l'estradizione di un cittadino non tuo,
certo,
e gli stai negando un diritto.
Sì, però c'è anche il trattato USA-UK che stabilisce che un cittadino non può essere estradato per motivazioni politiche.
Certo.
Eppure è difficile intravedere una motivazione più politica di così.
Ed uscì una lettera, tra l'altro, mi pare tra Lenin Moreno, che ebbe una risposta appunto tramite lettera da parte delle autorità britanniche.
Certo.
Ok, hai parlato molto e bene abbiamo parlato molto e bene dei rischi di questa professione. Passerei la parola ad Agata chiedendole cos'è oggi la libertà appunto di informazione, la libertà di stampa, e cosa ne pensa quindi?
Beh, intanto volevo aggiungere un attimo a quello che ha detto Germana sul pericolo che corre oggi Assange. Lui è uscito dall'isolamento ed è in una situazione psicologica estremamente grave. cioè è stato sottoposto a torture psicologiche. Ci sono lettere a livello internazionale di medici che ne riconoscono riconoscono il fatto che lui abbia subito umiliazioni e torture che sicuramente abbassano le difese di qualunque persona e che la portano veramente alla disperazione. E nel momento in cui è stato fatto uscire dall'isolamento, è iniziata la pandemia del Covid. Cioè già Julian Assange ha dei problemi polmonari, quindi rischia da un momento all'altro di morire per Covid, prima ancora che lo estradino. E questa è una cosa molto molto grave, e quello che fa paura soprattutto è il silenzio su tutto questo.
Hai avuto contatti diretti con persone che stanno vicine ad Assange?
Io ho cercato Stefania Maurizi, che gentilmente mi risponde sempre, ho chiesto informazioni e mi ha detto che mi ha confermato che la situazione è veramente grave, grave, grave. Tra l'altro ieri la mamma di Assange, Christine, che è molto molto attiva da questo punto di vista, ha pubblicato una foto in cui ci sono Assange